Hey, it's Dr. Darren Schmidt. So I got some subjects I want to go over. And the first one has to do with this book right here. And the book is called How to Starve Cancer. So the reason why I bought this book, it has to do with the patient. I'm going to tell you the story. So this guy called me up more than a year ago, and he had prostate cancer. And the marker for that is PSA, prostate specific antigen. And his score at the time was 200. And he wanted to be like 1 or less than 1. So he was doing the Budwig diet. Now, Dr. Budwig was one of the students of Dr. Otto Warburg. He's the guy that figured out how cancer cells metabolize and make energy. So Dr. Budwig created a diet that supposedly reverses cancer, but to be honest, I've never seen it work. But in this instance, my patient was doing the Budwig diet in a ketogenic version. So I thought, okay, well, this might work. He's doing ketosis and the Budwig diet together. So I'm on the phone with him, and he's very active physically, athletically, with this high PSA. And time goes by, and I say, "What's your PSA now?" And he wasn't checking his PSA. He didn't want to see what the numbers were. He said, "Well, it must be gone because I feel so good." Well, I kept pushing him to get the PSA done. And what happened was he finally did, and it was 1,008. So his PSA went crazy high. Like I said, it should be 1 or less. So months and months and months go by. I can look back in the file, and I don't remember. A long time goes by. He emailed me 6 days ago, and now his PSA is 0.67. And he didn't do radiation chemo. He didn't do the surgery. He didn't get the PSA or the prostate taken out. How did he get his PSA from 1,008 down to 0.67? Is based on the information in this book. Now, the woman who wrote this book, she had cancer in 1999, stage 4. There's no stage 5. Stage 4 cervical cancer, metastasis to the lungs. And by 2004, it was completely gone, and it's never come back. And so she put together, she's a physiotherapist. So she's in the medical world, but she's not a medical doctor. And she's more into being a physical therapist, more into like muscles and bones and rehabilitation of past trauma, etc. And she started to put this information together. And this person helped her out, Dr. Thomas Seyfried. And there's many other people that she thanks at the beginning of the book as to how she came up with her particular cocktail of supplements and drugs to get rid of her cancer completely. So the number one thing you got to know, it's not a problem of DNA. Every single oncologist and every single standard doctor or scientist or researcher thinks that the DNA goes haywire, and then you have accelerated cell replication. You can't think that way. The way that you think is the way Seyfried talks about it, and Otto Warburg talked about it back in the 20s, is that it's a problem of cell metabolism and lactate fermentation. And the problem is the mitochondria aren't working. There could be 2,000 to 10,000 or more mitochondria in every single cell, and they make energy, and the cell uses that energy to survive and to be healthy. So when the mitochondria don't work well, you have other sources of energy. That would be glycolysis, which is using sugar, and then fermentation, which is using alcohol or lactate or something like that. So, but if you're using excess glycolysis and your mitochondria aren't working for whatever reason, then that's bad. And if you're fermenting, that's even worse. So you got to fix the metabolism and the respiration of the cells. And that's what Thomas Seyfried talks about this. There's like over 1,000 references to back up everything that he says. This reads like a textbook. So she uses that information to come up with her cocktail. And I haven't even read this yet, but I know enough that there's a various cocktails in the back depending on the cancer. And she's had a lot of other doctors help her out, and she did a lot of research to put this book together, and it was published just a few years ago. So she spent since 1999 figuring this out for herself and for others. So it's almost like I want to start a book club. So if you're interested, buy this book. You can find it on Amazon. The author is Jane McClelland, and start reading through it and put comments on this video below, and share what you learn and share what's important and clinically relevant. It's super interesting. But like I said, you got to know, like, the actual mechanism has to do with respiration. It's not DNA alteration. The DNA alteration comes later. It's a secondary problem. The primary problem is metabolism and respiration. Okay, so the next thing I want to go over, and then I'll get to some questions, is I want to talk about chronic infections and how they behave inside the body. So when people have, I just had this happen with a few people recently, where we start them on a program of good diet and supplements, and they feel better, and then they crash. And the crash, they feel worse, and we don't know why. And so we have to figure out, why is that? Well, they may have had a history before of Epstein-Barr virus, or maybe they had mono when they're in their teens, or maybe it could be like an infected root canal, which I talked about in a recent video. So these organisms can take off, if you will, at any moment for any reason. And it's usually during a time when the immune system is suppressed. It could be like during the nighttime, it could be during a change in seasons, when there's more pollen in the air. Maybe they just had an emotional stress and it weakened their immune system, it ramped up their adrenals. Organisms will take advantage at any moment that they can. And there are people who are completely, totally sick every day, and the infections are raging. Okay, so then you got to do things to reduce that burden, and then at the same time increase the energy of the body. And again, how do you increase the energy of the body? It's the ATP, which is made by the mitochondria. It always comes back to the individual cells, like the mitochondria. The father of pathology, Virchow, back in the late 1700s, or was it? Yeah, in 1800s, he said all disease begins in the cell, right? It doesn't begin in the heart. It doesn't begin in the name the organ. It begins in the cells. And you can have the cells of the heart, being tormented by disease, or it could be cells in the brain or whatever, but you got to think at the level of the cells. Okay, so more about the chronic infections. When you're working with medications, for example, antibiotics, antifungals, they're pretty specific. When you work with with herbs that have antimicrobial effects or immune enhancing effects, they have a broader spectrum. So, for example, oregano can take care of bacteria, fungus, parasites, possibly. Okay, so now I don't treat infections. That goes against my license. I don't ever kill bacteria. And I was talking about cancer earlier. I don't treat cancer. I have patients that have cancer, and I help them with their nutrients, with nutrition. That's a legal disclaimer. Okay, I'm done with that legal disclaimer. So now I listened to a great podcast, and I'll put the link below after this goes live. And it's Dave Asprey. He's the Bulletproof executive guy, Bulletproof Coffee. And he's interviewing a guy named Dr. Feynman, Feyman. Dr. Feynman's a medical doctor, actually from Ann Arbor, and then he moved to Virginia. And in Virginia, he started seeing some people that were really sick, that he wasn't familiar with how sick they were. And so he had to, dig into this. This is probably 13 years ago or so. And I could be wrong on that. But the point is, they had Lyme disease. So he started doing Lyme protocols on them in the medical, sort of alternative medical theory of high dose antibiotics for a longer period of time. And they weren't getting better. So he had to rethink the approach of Lyme. And what he said during this podcast with Dave Asprey is that it's not Lyme, it's mold. Even if the patient has the bullseye rash from a tick bite, even if it comes back from the Western blot test or the isogenics test, even if it comes back positive for Lyme and Babesia and Bartonella and all these other organisms, they both were in agreement that you treat it like it's mold. Now, in the alternative world with the herbs and stuff, you can add cat's claw and golden seal and all these other herbs, and they can possibly take care of Babesia, Bartonella, and Lyme and mold. All right, but the point here is that the title of this podcast was very intriguing to me. And I like the simplicity of it, and it makes sense. Now, Dave Asprey had toxic mold poisoning from an apartment that he lived in San Francisco in his 20s. And he ballooned up with his weight up to 300 pounds. And he lived in this place for 4 years. There was, the carpet was wet in the living room. So they ripped up the carpet and they put down hardwood floors, but they didn't address the water intrusion, which is the primary thing to address. So for 4 years, he was breathing in this toxic mold, ballooned up to 300 pounds, went to see a few doctors and they didn't have any solutions. And he had to figure this out for himself. And he was like an IT big tech guy, software developer guy. And he just put his brain into it. And he said, it's either black mold or it's mycoplasma or it's Lyme. And for him, it was, and he was at first treated as if it was Lyme. But then later he's like, no, it's mold. And he fixed it that route. So the stories that I hear, I'm going to go off a little bit on mold a little bit more. I have a patient, she had a bad moldy house and it ruined her health. So they moved into another house and that one had mold and it caused more harm. They built a house. This is their third house. They built it 4 years ago. And the plumber did not attach a pipe to the shower on the first floor. And the water stayed on the floor. It went underneath the top floor into the subfloor. And it leaked into the bedroom. So this hardwood floor became wet. They tore it up. And underneath it was a subfloor. Underneath that was another subfloor. All 3 layers of wood was wet. 4 years of shower water going straight into the floor. And so she found that Sunday. So we're talking 5 days ago. And she moved into an apartment Wednesday. She was out of there. So whenever you look at, buying a house, you got to check for mold. An apartment, a dorm, universities, they don't care so much. Rental housing, it could be a disaster. You got to smell for mold. You got to look for it. You got to touch the walls, go in the basement, look for weird colors. You got to be a mold detective for wherever you live. And if you build a house, you got to make sure the plumbers do it right. They're the ones that can mess up and ruin your house and ruin your health. Okay, so there's my what I want to say about the infections. The last thing I want to talk about is balancing hormones. I have people recently, they say, one woman said to me, fix my cortisol. And I'm like, okay, do you have a blood test or saliva test showing your cortisol is off? And she said, no. And then I said, okay, well, how do you know your cortisol is off? And she goes, because I'm stressed. Okay, so we're not actually like targeting cortisol. We're actually going to help your body adapt to the stresses that you have. That could be adrenals, it could be thyroid, it could be brain, it could be heart. These organs, when they're tired, make you tired, make your whole body tired. So you can't just blame cortisol. Now, I'm saying this because in the medical world, especially the alternative medical world, there's a lot of talk about balancing hormones. And so women will say to me, balance my hormones, please. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about symptoms. So based on the symptoms and based on the muscle testing procedures that we do, we get a really good idea like what to fix. And when we supply herbs like chase tree, we have a product called Femco, we have black cohosh, they cover a lot of territory, right? And they can increase or decrease hormones, but they don't force anything to occur. They allow the body to make the changes that the body wants. It's a big difference. The amount of estrogen that a woman makes her whole lifetime is 1/4 teaspoon. Her whole life. That's how much estrogen a woman makes. All right, now I talk about these 3 circles a lot in my videos. So you have to address the causes of chronic disease, and you have to address the mechanism, and then feed the organs to make the symptoms go away. Nowhere on here are hormones. Hormones are not part of the deal. They are tertiary. You got primary causes, you feed the organs, and then the organs work better. The adrenals and, sex hormones, reproductive organs, thyroid, they work better when you have the organs working better. So I don't have hormones on here. So there's my I just needed to say that because a lot of people say my hormones are off. Balance my hormones, please. Well, okay. Well, what symptoms do you have? And let's figure out what organs need help, and then we'll try to work on those organs. All right. So those are the things I just needed to get off my chest. They've been sitting on me for a week, and now you have them, and I can release them. So, all right. Let me look at some of these questions. What is your thoughts on how multiple sclerosis develops? Some people believe it is virus related. It depends on at what age does MS start. So if the MS starts and you're 50 years old, it could be just your diet. It could be, I had a woman diagnosed with MS, and it happened. She had a flare up twice a year. And so she was with me for a number of months. And then she said to me one day, I had an MS flare up. I spent the whole weekend on the couch. And I said to her, okay, so what'd you do on Friday? And she goes, I don't know. I just, I went shopping, went grocery shopping, and I had to drive my kid over and she goes, oh, and I saw the dentist. And I said, well, what'd you do at the dentist? Oh, they just did a cleaning. Everything is fine. And I said, you have fillings in your teeth? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, they stirred up a bunch of mercury and it started bellowing out of your mouth and you couldn't see it and you couldn't smell it and you inhaled it and you got acute mercury poisoning. And that's why you spent the weekend on the couch. And that's how that goes. So since then, and that was more than 10 years ago. And since then, she's never had an MS flare up ever because it was from her teeth and she addressed it correctly. Now, if somebody has MS at the age of 17 and they're in a wheelchair at the age of 21, that's something that I don't know too much about. But you could consider possibly maybe a vaccination reaction from earlier. Sure, it could be mercury. There's got to be a cause, right? And I mean, they could be walking just fine at the age of 10, possibly, and then something happens, and there just needs to be some really good investigation as to what caused that. All right. Lyme disease comes out when you're weakened. That's true for any infection. Any organism will thrive when you're weakened. I use crushed garlic in water 3 to 4 times a day to get rid of a tooth infection. And just this past week, an upper respiratory infection. Anyone else ever tried that? Yeah, so there's a ton of different plants with their medicinal value. That when I was in chiropractic school in the mid 90s, I would get chronic sore throats. And I just got this combination of, it was like garlic and cayenne pepper and something else as a liquid. I would just squirt it down my throat and it just would fix it just like that. Okay. Diseases are linked with emotion/traumas. Yeah, I don't get into the emotional aspect of it. But, a lot of people, they come to me and they want to talk about emotions. And I say, well, what happened before you got sick? And they say, well, I got a divorce and I lost my job and my parents died. And that's so traumatic. And that can then lead to a weakening of the organs, certainly. But, then I feed the organs and then they get better and they still have the emotional trauma, but their body's dealing with the emotional trauma so much better. There's a story. One of my mentors had a patient. She was a woman and she had a date to get married. Well, that day was coming. It was like a week from the wedding day. And she comes home from work and she was living with the guy. And the guy took all the furniture and everything out of the house and left a note and said, sorry, I couldn't handle the pressure. And he bailed. He completely skipped town and stole all the furniture. And she started crying and she wouldn't stop crying. And days go by and she just can't stop crying. So the mom brings the daughter in to see this holistic based chiropractor, nutrition based chiropractor. And he put her on Minchex from Standard Process. And an hour and 15 minutes later, she looks up at her mom and she's done crying. It's just that simple sometimes. You feed the brain, you feed the body, and it can stop that sort of reaction. All right, could you please make a video? Ooh, this just skipped. Oh, here it is. Could you please make a video on combination of binge eating disorder with morbid obesity? Oh man, I don't know if I know anything about that. Once you're infested with the mycelium, it is a protective substrate for all other pathogens. So reality is is fake, there's no spoon, is saying that mycelium protects other pathogens. That's interesting. Um, you know, mold can hold on to heavy metals. So you start killing mold that releases heavy metals, then you can become toxic with heavy metals. A basic question: I catch cold very easily. I go out after having a shower, my body gets weaker. What do you think my body is lacking? Possibly meat. I don't know what your diet looks like. And it could be a thyroid issue. So your temperature regulation problems, that's a thyroid issue oftentimes. Okay, I'm gonna scroll down. Um, Best supplements to remove mercury. I have 2 videos on this. One video is called Detox Your Brain. The other video is called New Advancements in Detoxification. Those 2 videos answer that question. Is it a bad idea to detox with amalgam fillings? No, I don't think it's a bad idea to do that. It's good to get those out eventually. You'll still get better even with the fillings in your teeth. What causes hot flashes to keep going for years? That could be a kidney problem, and you could use supplements like Solidago or Buco to flush out the kidneys. The kidneys regulate the amount of fluid in your body. So hot flashes could be your body's trying to release this fluid that's being held in, and the kidneys aren't correctly getting rid of it. But, to answer these questions best, I need to know what your diet is and how many carbs you're eating, and are you eating, like, how much protein you're eating. Okay, my cousin has MS since she was 21 or so, 40 years now, and she can move her left hand and that's it. Okay. Oh, here's a good question. David Bicycle, DC, chiropractor. I know your feelings on lactic acidosis. What about lactic acid yeast, which is a product from Standard Process? And calcium lactate. Thank you for your fine care and concern. Yeah, you're welcome. So lactic acid yeast is a supplement. It's a wafer that you chew on, and it's to repair the intestines and to repair the microbiome in the intestines. And it's a food. So you can have lactic acid that's very dangerous, and then lactic acid that's food in this form of lactic acid yeast. The molecule is exactly the same. But what's the difference? The difference is the spin of the field. This is physics. And this is I learned this in college chemistry. It's called chirality. And just like the weather patterns around the world, they go from west to east, the wind blows that way. If it were to go east to west, it would be a different chirality. So same thing with molecules. So chiro means hands, like chiropractic is chiropractors that they work on your body with their hands. Chirality is the spin of the molecules. So the one that spins this way, see, because you turn your fingers in this way, and the other one spins this way. So anyways, lactic acid yeast is a good product. And, when it comes to, if you want to research a product, go on Amazon and start reading reviews. So that's a good way to find out what a lot of people think about lactic acid yeast. I'm a fan of it. All right, the other question was on calcium lactate. So that's about milk, not about lactic acid. It's fine. Calcium lactate's a food. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Would you recommend alternate day or intermittent fasting for a 14-year-old boy who had osteosarcoma? When it comes to like intermittent fasting or alternate day fasting, yeah, a 14-year-old can totally handle that. I started working on the farm when I was 9, and I never had breakfast for those 17 years or 17 summers I worked on the farm. So I was intermittent fasting every summer for 17 years, beginning at the age of 9. So yeah, a 14-year-old, he should be able to handle it. Now, one thing though that I want to say about in this book, so he has osteosarcoma. Different cancers will respond differently to food. For example, check this out. Some cancers love to eat fat. So in these protocols, some of the diets are like only pescatarian. So it's low fat protein sources plus plenty of plants. There are cancers that feed on ketones. There's cancers that feed on dairy. There's cancers that feed on protein. Of course, there's a lot of cancers that feed on carbs. So depending on that type of cancer, There's a different diet. Some cancers love fat at the beginning of their growth, and then later they love sugar. Okay, it's in here. So we need to do like a mind meld and together read this book and learn from it. Okay, and Thomas Seyfried, he wrote at the very bottom right here, Thomas Seyfried is my hero. You know, Thomas Seyfried was an oncology researcher at Boston University, and he's been excluded from NIH funding for cancer research once he came out with his his love for Otto Warburg's theory and started talking about, cancer that way. So Dr. Mercola is funding his research. Okay, this is a monumental accomplishment. This is from Thomas Seyfried about this book. A strategy for surviving advanced cancer, regardless of the tissue or organ involved. Jane has done a great service to mankind. Oh my God, I'm so excited to read this book. All right, next. Could I possibly get a copy of this, or do you have a book on all this? I need to have this info. Yeah, just get that book. Okay, what is the best H. pylori natural remedy while having real bad arthritis? Well, yeah, so bacteria in the stomach love to eat the dead tissue of the stomach. So you have to repair the tissue of the stomach. And so you do multiple therapies. So you can add in enzymes, hydrochloric acid, and then the stomach needs B6, it needs salt, and it needs something else that's not coming to my brain right now. You could do like collagen support because the stomach is tissue. And then you could try liquid oregano. You could do oregano capsules that open up in the stomach. But I would recommend that you go to a good alternative healthcare practitioner and try it out. And if it doesn't work, you can always do antibiotics. All right. But I don't recommend the Prilosec, Prevacid, the purple pills. But in my career, I've only had about a half a dozen people that I couldn't get off the Prilosec and Prevacid. Everybody else, it's not that hard to help with stomach and ulcers and acid reflux and heartburn. That's pretty easy. All right. Love the videos, Doc. Do you find activated charcoal helpful for anything? Yeah. The activated charcoal I use comes from Cellcore Biosciences. And my video that I talk about it in is called New Advancements in Detoxification. They've taken this concept of activated charcoal and they've accelerated it and elevated it to a new level of awesomeness and intelligence and effectiveness. Okay, what's the best magnesium to take for low blood pressure and ectopic beats? I've never been happy with any magnesium in my whole career until in the last few months. Now, there is a product called Natural Calm magnesium powder, and that's for constipation. But when it comes to the heartbeat, there's a product called, I'm going to tell you two, but the one that we carry now is called OptiMag Neuro, and the other one is from Standard Process. They just released it. It's called Easy Mag. Okay, here's the deal about both of these magnesiums. It's a collection of magnesiums. It's not just magnesium lactate or magnesium citrate or magnesium whatever. It's all of them together, which is fantastic. It's kind of a new theory, and there's other companies picking up on this. But so some of the magnesiums work on the colon, some work on the central nervous system, some work on the extremities. So nervous system for the heart. All right, OptiMag Neuro or Easy Mag. All right, thank you for the question. Doc, can you please expand on appendectomy in relation to gut health? Oh man, I don't know too much about that. So the appendix supposedly is a warehouse for good bacteria and microbes, so that if you have a depletion of microbes in your gut, then from the appendix, then you get a repopulation of the gut of the good bugs. That's all I know about that. And I don't really go too far into that. You just don't want that to get infected and have it taken out. All right. Let's see here. I was taking D3, K2. My arm felt heavy, dead. I felt very weak, tired. Heartbeat was racing when I woke up in the morning. Apparently, cholecalciferol is used in rat poison. Yeah, there's that guy named the People's Chemist, and As far as I know, he's the only one that says that cholecalciferol is used as rat poison. I don't know about that. I mean, I haven't had anybody ever have trouble with D3. And when people take it, their cholecalciferol, their D3 levels in their body goes up. I remember one time I was giving a lecture in Seattle, and this probably was 8 years ago. And so it's like Friday or Saturday night, and I'm walking down the sidewalk. We're going to a restaurant, and I can't feel my feet. And I'm pounding my feet on the sidewalk so I know where they're at. And I thought, well, if this keeps up, I'm going to be in a wheelchair. And it had been occurring for a few weeks before that, but it was just really bad on that one day. So I got home after the weekend. I ran my blood test. My vitamin D was low. So I started taking a high dose vitamin D, and it took about 6 weeks for that numbness, or the numbness, the nerve problem in my feet, to go away 100%. So most people are deficient in D. So take a really good D3 product. And I don't know what to tell you about your arm issue that you had with that. Can I be a healthy vegan? I've met a few healthy vegans, a handful. It's really hard. And I think that these healthy vegans have some sort of weird genetic makeup that allows them to be healthy. But I've communicated with some, and I've met some in person. So, but I don't know. I wouldn't risk it. Okay. Okay. Do you believe in a afterlife? I do. I do believe in afterlife. All right. I'm scrolling down to the bottom. Doc, is there any connection between colostrum usage and diarrhea? Probably, depending on the person. There are people who are super sensitive to various supplements. I've been having some people go on the carnivore diet. Some people get constipated. Some people get diarrhea. So it's just, yeah, for sure. Anybody can have any kind of weird reaction. I want to know your thought on intermittent fasting, prolonged fast, and keto for someone like me who had thyroid cancer with no thyroid anymore. I think it's totally fine to do fasting. You have no thyroid. Hopefully you're on a thyroid medication. I think it's completely fine. Yeah, thanks, Kevin Bowersock. L-glutamine is that one you couldn't remember for stomach issues. That's actually more for the small intestine. Okay, but there was something else for the stomach. If you have SIBO, do I stay away from prebiotics? No, prebiotics would be helpful for SIBO in most cases. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm actually going to wrap this up. So thanks for watching, and I'll be talking about this book more later. And it follows along the pattern. This is really, comes from Otto Warburg and Dr. Corey and the metabolism of cell energy and respiration, and then and there's that book from Travis Christofferson called Tripping Over the Truth, How Cancer is a Metabolic Disease, which is a really good read. I read that in one day, and I think it's like 240 pages. I could be wrong on that, but this is a textbook, and the book called Tripping Over the Truth from Travis Christofferson. It's not a textbook, but it tells the story very, very well. And in the end, it talks about a drug that can starve the cancer cell of its nutrients. And that drug, though, got caught up in legal problems, and the developer and the researcher, they're fighting each other. So the end of the book is, hey, we don't have any solutions because the only drug that we know of is wrapped up in a court battle. But the drugs that are in here, there's drugs and vitamins and herbs in here. But the drugs that are in here, they're all cheap, and some of them are used off label. But the point is, like, it's not like the $100,000 cancer drugs that are on the market now, $100,000 or $30,000 a month. That's what they're charging for these new cancer drugs. The drugs that are in here are cheap, and they've been around for a long time. There's nothing new about these drugs. They have different reactions, and they block different things on cells of different cancers. Okay, good. So thanks for watching, and thanks for your questions, and I'll see you at the next video.